Oh, Isabel, thank you so much for joining today. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So am I. I think it's such an important conversation, so I really look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. And as we start, if you want to share a little bit about who you are and what you do today, and then we take it from there.
Yeah, perfect. Well, my name is Isabelle Griffith. I'm the founder of a small coaching and training business called the School of Somatic Leadership for Women, and the creator of the Wisdom Within, which is a somatic practitioner training for practitioners, existing or new practitioners who want to support women through, the key challenges that we experience as women in today's society. That's like burnout and overgiving, overextending, overachieving, playing small, being plagued by self-doubt, not using our voice, all the things that hold us back from living and leading in expansive ways through working with the body and the somatic intelligence within. So that's what I do today. But before that, I spent over 20 years in the corporate world. At times, I was managing large teams across continents. I worked in the UK and abroad, so I have quite a large amount of experience within the corporate world. And for me, that experience led to a really severe burnout over 10 years ago, where it completely cracked me open. My world, as I knew it, came crashing down. My sense of self was absolutely shattered. My mind felt like a prison that I couldn't escape from. It was so filled with these harsh, inner critical thoughts. And I didn't know how to move forward because I'd always been ticking all the boxes, following the blueprint that says if you do this, then you'll get to that place where you can finally be happy forevermore. And actually, the place that it led me to was feeling completely broken, and so broken, in fact, that I couldn't really see a path forward. So it took me about 18 months to recover from that experience. And it was a really tender time. And while I wouldn't wish that on anyone, I can look back now with some sort of gratitude because that led me to completely reorienting my life, the way that I choose to live, the work that I'm choosing to do in this world, the impact that I'm choosing to have. And so the work that I do, I feel very passionate about because I imagine what the world would look like if women weren't exhausted, if we weren't depleted and overgiving all the time, if we weren't feeling burnt out, if we had the courage and the capacity more than anything to step up, to stand up for what we believe in, and to use our voice to create change. And I think that would harmonize what we're seeing today and create, in my view, a society that's probably more harmonious, where people are more connected to themselves, connected to each other, but also connected to the natural world that we live in. Coming back to that sort of inner experience as well as the outer experience that we have every day. So I feel really passionate about this. And that's why I'm so excited about having this conversation with you, because obviously, wealth, money really interplays with all of that. So I've been looking forward to us speaking.
Great. Yeah, me too. And thank you for that introduction. And there was a lot in there, of course. But if you want, maybe talk a little bit about that switch and how you made that transition from your corporate career, obviously with a very intense experience, but how did that lead to that transformation and how did you come about or coming into contact with the somatic work that you do now and maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. It was a very organic unfolding. When I experienced burnout and it felt like I hit a wall, but from a train speeding at 300 miles an hour. And as I said, it took me 18 months to recover. And those were really difficult times. And one of the things that really supported me in my recovery was yoga. I'd already been practicing yoga for many, many years. But these moments in my week when I went to this yoga class and I was on my mat were the only moments at all where I felt like it was okay to be me. It felt bearable to be in my own skin. My thoughts sort of settled down a little bit, and there was a sense of ease, just a little bit more ease. And that was so powerful, because that was the glimmer that really helped to pull me through. And I think to this day, yoga probably saved my life. And so as I recovered, I realized that I wanted to train as a yoga teacher, because it felt really important to me to be supporting women in this way. And I knew immediately that the kind of yoga I wanted to teach was yoga that would focus on supporting people with mental health. And so I began training as a yoga teacher. But at the same time, I also went back to work. I took a part-time role, so I worked 4 days a week, and I began my yoga teacher training. Then yoga led me to training as a mindfulness and self-compassion teacher, because I had people at the end of the class coming to see me. Sometimes they would, tears would roll down their faces in Shavasana, that moment in yoga where we lie down and we pose and we do nothing. Or they would come afterwards really sharing their challenges and their experiences, and I felt like I wasn't really equipped to support them at that level. So I began training in mindfulness and self-compassion, and then that led me to training in coaching modalities. I started with NLP and various others, and then that led me to somatics. I had a conversation once with somebody around a podcast, and she was delivering a training around embodiment and somatics and trauma-informed yoga. And as she started talking to me about it, it became clear that the reason why yoga was so helpful to me is because it led me back to my body. It's because it settled my nervous system. It's because it created a sense of safety and capacity in that moment. And to begin with, I couldn't really carry that in my everyday, so I only experienced it when I was doing yoga. But as my capacity grew, that really resourced me to meet life in different ways. So it was clear to me that that was the path I wanted to pursue. And so I began training in somatics, and I've done many somatics and embodiment-led trainings. And for me, and I could speak for hours, so you might need to cut me off. But for me, what's really, I think, potent with somatic approaches is that we go beyond the mind, and we connect with a deeper understanding of why we do the things we do, why we behave in certain ways, why we have certain ways of thinking, why we pull ourselves back when we really want to move forward. All of these things become clearer because we dive into the nervous system and how it's constantly pulling us back into safety. And if we can befriend our nervous system and we use the word regulate, which I don't love, but regulate our nervous system in these moments of, I had so much anxiety that I could barely function. If we can find a way to settle our nervous system down, then capacity opens and we can approach life completely differently. And then, of course, we can expand into that. And with that renewed capacity, we can bring new ways of being online. And so for me, it's really important because I began some of my coaching experiences working more on the mindset, and I felt like something was missing. I wasn't quite touching what I wanted to touch, but I didn't know what it was. And for me, somatics was the answer to that, really just coming home to our body. And it's also such a beautiful modality in terms of helping us to reconnect with life, because we experience life through the body. And when we disconnect it from our body, and this was so me, we are experiencing life through our thinking. We think about life, we strategize about life, we plan it, we control it, but actually it takes us away from fully experiencing it. So maybe I should stop here, because as I said, I could go on for a long time, but that's kind of how it unfolded. Yeah.
Thank you. And I mean, I love listening to you. So don't limit yourself. But you touched a little bit on self-worth, self-compassion, and obviously those are big themes for women. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about how your work and what you do can help women to strengthen their feelings of self-worth and to feel more self-compassion, because that affects in so many areas of their lives, and obviously in the career, but also how you support yourself to accept the career and the developments and the things that happen in life, so that you're not too attached. to your career identity and maybe push yourself too much, because that's one of the things that we talked about as well. You find your own definitions of wealth and self-worth and are not pushed into areas that you might not want to go to because of external pressures.
Yeah, but that's such a big question, and I could go in so many different directions. So, but if I forget, please remind me to touch on self-compassion, because I think that's really important piece. And I think to what you were saying, what I've learned over years of supporting women is that most of the challenges that we experience come from what I'd say is self-worth injury. And that means that, through our experience, at some point, we developed a belief that we're not worthy of certain things, or that we're broken, or that we're unlovable, or that to be worthy of what we really desire, we need to constantly prove ourselves externally. And that's what keeps us stuck in these cycles. And that's, I think it's important when we speak about women to talk about the context we are in today and our individual context, where we've all had experiences that chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you've had a lived experience of many years, and that can bring all sorts of things. But also through the field of epigenetics, we know now that the experiences of women in our lineage up to 8 generations prior to us will continue to live in our body as an imprint. So, yes, we've made so much progress, right? And there's still so much more to do. And so our experience today might be easier, more comfortable. We have more rights, we have more opportunities. And at the same time, we also carry the experiences of our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers. And if we just pause for a moment and reflect on what they might have gone through, the rights that they didn't have, the way that they might have been treated by society generally, that explains a lot. So perhaps that's a good time to introduce, self-compassion, because I think sometimes what leads us to burning out or to overgive, overextend, overachieve, etc., is really that sense of sourcing our worth externally, the desire to prove ourselves. That's endless. We never get to the point where we feel worthy enough, and I think what the beautiful journey that we might want to go on is becoming self-sourcing, sourcing our worth internally, reconnecting with who we are beneath all of these layers of beliefs we have about ourselves, and coming into contact with the place within us that is worthy of love and belonging just because we're here. And I know it's really difficult to embrace when we're in a place of, I'm filled with self-critical thoughts. What are you talking about? So what I've found, one of the simplest way to practice this self-compassion to begin with, in those moments when our mind is telling us how we're failing in 100 different ways, is to take a breath, place both hands on our hearts, and to pause for a moment and to just say in the quiet of our own mind, no wonder, no wonder. And it gives me goosebumps every time, because I think it's such a validating, powerful practice that is so simple and so accessible, to just offer to ourselves the kindness that we would offer someone else. And to me, a big part of becoming more self-sourcing, healing these self-worth injuries, is about realizing that there's a place within us that is resilient. There's a place within us who is maybe even powerful. There's a place within us who is whole. And coming from that place within us, we can tend towards the part of ourselves that are feeling unworthy or stuck or filled with critical thoughts, just the same way as we would tend towards a hurt animal or a young child. We wouldn't, if we saw a child coming home from school saying, I'm being bullied, or I've had a really tough day, hopefully we wouldn't say, well, just get on with it, tough luck. We might say, I'm really sorry that you're feeling this way. That sounds really hard. How can I help? And that's extending that same compassion to ourselves. And it sounds really easy, and it isn't, but it's disproportionately powerful, because as we shift that relationship with ourselves from, again, in those moments where maybe we feel disappointed, or we feel like we're caught in this inner criticism, or we feel like we burnt out, we can't anymore, if we can find within us that sense of self that has a little bit of activation, a little bit of energy, a little bit of resilience, and can look towards this part who feels really depleted and exhausted with those words and this compassion, or even a gesture, just, a hug or a gentle word, it's okay, I'm here. It shifts everything. And over time, that shifts the relationship that we have with ourselves, because we begin to develop self-trust, and self-trust leads to self-sovereignty. So yes, that might be a lot, but I think the self-compassion piece is so important. And then perhaps to add to that, as we do this, we also want to tend to this injury that maybe is buried somewhere within us. And we don't need to dig it all up and to figure all out, where did it come from? Why is it there? But simply just giving space for that a part of us to be expressed a little bit more, so that it can be digested, so that the experience can be completed because it's seen and it's heard and it's witnessed. So I hope this makes some sense. It makes a lot of sense to me, but I want to make sure it makes sense to somebody who's maybe new to the world of somatics and how this might work. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, what you said about how we treat ourselves versus how we would typically treat someone else is usually very different. And it's a very vivid image and reminder for us to be a little bit kinder to
Yeah.
ourselves in situations where, as women, we tend to give a lot of nurturing, give a lot of attention to others, but not to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you
And
for sharing.
you're really welcome. And when I speak about this, I often talk about a cycle that to me is maybe the self-sovereignty cycle or self-empowerment cycle. I don't know what it would be named, but that's sort of the way to guide ourselves through these moments, to me, is beginning by self-awareness. So noticing, it could be anything, but it may be that we're standing in front of a boardroom or to deliver a presentation, or just speaking up in a meeting with our colleagues, or putting ourselves out there as an entrepreneur. And it may be that we're feeling that self-doubt come up, and it's noticing. And we notice because we've developed an awareness of what it feels like in our body. Our body will feel it first before our mind can make sense of it. So we're noticing that something isn't quite right. And then we move to self-regulation or self-stability, taking a few breaths, Okay, I'm noticing and I'm just coming back in presence here, so I can bring a little bit more of that self-resilient energy. And then self-compassion, it's okay, you will be fine. We've done this 1,000 times. It's fine, we're here together. And then we can move into self-leadership from that place of, I've taken a breath. I've really seen the part of me who's afraid. And now I can move towards self-leadership, bringing more online of that part of us that is resilient and carrying on. And that can happen in really short moments. And the more we practice these sort of ways of being, the easier it becomes. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's a great reminder of the different steps that we can take to support ourselves. One thing we talked about last time you and I spoke was around defining what is your wealth and identifying your own definition of wealth versus our external definitions of wealth. And that's something that we talk quite a lot about in The Wealth Within Her. And you talked about what some of the negative consequences can be of not following your own definition of wealth, but instead trying to live up to external definitions. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that as well. That would be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, and of course, self-worth is intrinsically linked with wealth, because if we have these imprints from the past that limit the worth that we believe we have, we're going to be limited in our capacity to receive. It will feel like if we are wanting to receive more, we're not deserving of that. And so we'll pull back again and again and again. So the two are intrinsically linked. And I think that's part of what's really alive in the experience of women today is, if we are lacking that sense of self-worth, perhaps that means we're not putting ourselves out there enough. We're not taking up space. We're not sharing our ideas. And therefore, already we are kind of on the back foot when it comes to perhaps having bigger career opportunities or being exposed to more opportunities for wealth. So that's one thing. But the other piece that I think we talked about quite a bit last time is that we are being pulled by the current of what society defines as success. And we rarely pause to stop and ask ourselves, hold on, is this really what winning at life will look like for me? Is this definition of success really what's going to bring me the fulfillment, the meaning that I need? And of course, we all need to live, and we all need to work to some extent, and we all need to make a living to be able to thrive in life. But I think there are deeper questions that we're not asking because we just pulled naturally in the current, and we're stuck in these cycles of overextending, overachieving, proving our worth, often until there's a moment of a threshold moment, a moment where maybe we burn out, or maybe we break our foot, or something happens that slows us down. And in those moments, then we sort of have a chance to recalibrate. And often we realize that we are pursuing a trophy that we are not really getting to, that we are overgiving in a context that doesn't reward us in the right proportion. We exhausting ourselves pursuing something that feels really hard to pursue, and that we are always second in the race. And at the same time, that isn't even what gives us fulfillment and meaning. So we're losing on both sides. We're not rewarded fairly for the work that we do, or the way in which we are pursuing this sense of self-worth. And that's a systemic problem. But also we might realize that actually this isn't even the race we want to be in. So then we can reorient towards, well, what does a wealthy life look like for me? How do I define wealth? Is wealth about perhaps financial rewards? And if that's what it is, that's absolutely fine. And then maybe we're in the right path. Is wealth about the experiences that I have with my family and these special moments? Is wealth having that inner connection? How can I define winning for myself in a way that feels true? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to break our career down and sort of leave everything behind and start something else completely. But we can begin to reorient a little bit more towards what has meaning and what leads us to what wealth looks and feels like for us. We make different decisions and choices day to day, and they can be really small. It might be, again, giving ourselves 15 minutes at lunchtime to go and sit in a park, because wealth means spending time feeling connected to something greater than us. It might be coming home, and rather than rushing, as I used to do, I used to walk in rush, cook with my coat still on, barely greet my children. And they were little, they'd run to the door screaming, "Mommy, mommy." And now they're teenagers, and I would give everything I have to go back. But that might have been at that moment taking a breath, spending 15 minutes with them first, taking my coat off, and then cooking, so that I can integrate these moments that feels like they are fulfilling my sense of a wealthy life. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's also about just finding these ways of marrying living in today's world with what feels meaningful, and how we want to orient towards what feels like wealth. So to me, my definition of success is who I'm becoming. And it really matters. It's the work that I do, and it really matters to me, because it means that the impact that I'm having just by touching people every day, whether that's my children, a stranger, or the person who makes coffee for me at the coffee shop, I will impact them completely differently. And my impact in these small ways really matters. But what is it like for you? And I also want to normalize the fact that it takes time sometimes to even know what that would look like, because we are so used to being in that stream, and sometimes so disconnected with what we do want, what's there when it's not the natural path, that it takes a little bit of time to land. And again, to go back to my story, because that's the experience I'm most familiar with, for years I searched for, what else can I do? What could it look like? How else can I live? And I couldn't really come to anything. And then my body said, we're done here. We're stopping for 18 months. And it's that sort of organic unfolding that led me to where I am today. So sometimes there's an organic unfolding that needs to happen, but I think for that to happen, we need to give it a little bit of space. And that doesn't have to be burnout or a broken foot or a health scare. It can be just sitting on a bench for 10 minutes at lunchtime to have time with ourselves so we reconnect with what feels alive. Yes, maybe that's enough. enough around that. I don't know. Yeah, maybe how that resonates or what it brings up.
I think there's so many interesting reflections there, and you touched a little bit upon it. What would you give as some advice or suggestions to women who want to give themselves a little bit more of that possibility to reconnect with themselves and hopefully avoiding, a bigger life event that kind of forces them? What can they do in their day-to-day life to find some tools and some moments to reconnect a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, for me, reconnecting is about listening inwardly. And so it's developing that intimacy with ourselves again. And that's, in my view, best done in quiet or stillness or very gentle movement, so that it's not about the action we're taking, but it's about how it feels and what's happening within us as we do that. Because we want to begin to listen to that inner voice, but if we are always busy, there's no space. So it might be, again, sitting on a bench, it might be taking up a very short meditation practice, starting with even 2 minutes of sitting, and perhaps it helps to have a guided meditation to start with, or perhaps it's just putting some gentle music and just breathing and noticing the breath. It's such a powerful tool. And just noticing the pace of your breath and being present to what's happening within you as you breathe. It might be practicing very gentle somatic movement. And again, I think that's why yoga was so helpful to me, but it doesn't have to be any kind of formal practice. It can be just stretching our head and feeling the muscles in our body move and shift, because we're developing a relationship with ourselves. And perhaps the simplest and most potent one is to have these moments of pause. And I put a timer on my phone to go 3 times a day. And when the timer goes off, just taking a few breaths and asking ourselves, how am I feeling? And what do I need? And how can I tend to my needs in this moment? Because that disproportionately pulls our awareness from everywhere it's been, all these places, back to ourselves, and we can sense into our own needs. And that's the basis for developing a sense of sovereignty. I know what I need, and I'm tending to these needs. So sovereignty and trust. And as we do that, we go beyond the basic needs, because to begin with, especially if we're feeling exhausted, what I need is maybe a glass of water, maybe 5 minutes to myself, maybe a walk outside, or maybe a little bit of music, or whatever it may be. But as we tend to our need and we feel a bit more nourished, then desires start to come to life. The things that really give us joy, we have more space to do that. And so we can orient towards more, not just fulfilling our basic needs, but also what would give me joy? What would give me pleasure? What would make me feel alive? And then again, that's another breadcrumb on our path. So starting really small, and it's little and often. Yes, it would be wonderful to take a week off and go on a retreat and completely transform our life. And that's beautiful if we can do that. And it also doesn't bypass the, how am I feeling? What's here? What's present? What do I need? Can I actually tend to my needs and begin to re-listen to what my body is saying? So yes, that's where I would suggest starting.
Beautiful. I'm gonna try to practice that more, especially checking in several times a day. How do I feel and what do I need? Because I don't do that enough,
No,
sure.
no, of course we don't. Yeah,
Yes.
we lead really busy lives. Yeah, so it's easy
Mm.
to forget ourselves in all the busyness and attending to everything and everyone else. We're so attuned outwardly.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
we know the needs of other people before we know our own. So there's a relearning that needs to happen slowly. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Wow. Yeah. And and so you said, it doesn't have to be changing completely into different career or so on, but what would you say to women who are maybe thinking about that, like things come up. Am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place? How do you navigate that, and how would you suggest the steps to take for women who are in those situations?
Yeah. So I want to say first that it's very context dependent. You know, we all live in all of our layers of context, and that will include our financial resources, etc. But also, I think what's really important to know is we cannot leap further than our nervous system capacity to hold a vision that we have for ourselves. So what that means is, let's say I'm in a corporate job today and I really want to have my own business. And I'm still thinking about, well, what might it be? What could it look like, etc. And I decide that I'm just going to resign, to leave my work and to go all in on my business. And that might work well for some of us, as long as we have the capacity within our nervous system for that. But for most of us, it will create a lot of uncertainty, probably a lot of fear. And what might happen is that our nervous system will then perceive our situation as really dangerous and pull us back. And what I see very often is then that we end up in these places of being completely frozen. There's so much forward energy. We want to be doing the thing, you know, we want to be maybe creating a website or becoming visible, speaking up on LinkedIn or wherever we might want to do that. But something within us is really holding us back and we just can't, and we feel completely stuck. And that's because our nervous system doesn't have the capacity to absorb such a huge leap. So my suggestion is always to go in small steps and to expand at the pace of our nervous system. So what is the smallest doable step that we can do today? And that might mean that we take a little bit longer, but what it will also mean is that we don't collapse halfway through for weeks or months because our nervous system is just not coping. So what's the smallest doable step today? So again, if I'm that corporate woman, if I take myself back and if I have already got a sense of what I want to do, then, you know, and if I speak again about my experience, let's say that I know I want to become a mindfulness teacher or a somatic coach, then the smallest doable step today might be doing some research and, you know, looking at, well, what are some of the trainings that may be available for me to do? And then as I have the capacity to do that, maybe I sign up for a small training, just a taster. And then perhaps I take a bigger training. You know, the point being, it's just every step in its own time. And often I think we're trying to figure out the whole staircase, but we don't know who we will be when we're at the top of that staircase or even on step 10. So we're making decisions from this moment with our current capacity and resources that might become different as we move down the path. So I think a lot of trusting that the pace that we're taking is the right pace. A lot of really marinating in this sense of why. Why am I doing this? Why is this lighting me up? Why does this matter to me? Because we're going to need to anchor back into that time and time again and really remind ourselves in these tough moments, and there are tough moments along the way, about why we do this, whether it's going for the bigger job or whether it's changing career. And then again, just what is the smallest doable step today, maybe this week, and just working slowly towards that so that we move from this cliff that we're hanging on slowly towards the other cliff without taking a big jump. And I know this is often not what we want to hear because we'd like it to change overnight, but my experience is that that often gets us stuck. And then we pull away and we think that's not for me, and we abandon and we give up, and that's such a shame. So small doable steps. And if you are in a corporate career and you want to become self-employed, then maybe exploring working part-time so that you have time to dedicate to your passion as well as the resources to do so, because you still have that holding within the corporate work. And I also often talk about the fact that, let's say tomorrow, if I can't do the work that I'm doing now because for whatever reason that doesn't support me financially or something happens and I have to go back to taking a corporate job, my passion isn't going to be extinguished. I can volunteer for a women's shelter or for you know, a hotline for women who are abused or in difficult relationship, and that will still fulfill my purpose. So again, I think it's really important to not have that all or nothing. But, what can I do? What might be a first step? What would be the first doable thing? What would feel safe enough but expensive enough? And it doesn't have to be, let me just scrap everything and go all in. For some people, that will work. For most of us, I think that will freeze us. So, yeah.
And for someone who's not so attuned or so aware of their nervous system, and who might, consider or might even have taken that big step and then realized they get into a situation of freeze, how can we as women get more attuned with our nervous system? And you've talked about some things like pausing and asking yourself, what do I need? But what are other steps to actually learn to listen to our bodies and our nervous system more?
Yeah, one of the first steps that I take with the women I support is that coming home to ourselves and befriending our nervous system. And obviously, I guide women to do that. But what you can do on your own is beginning to research. You might want to research, for example, polyvagal theory, to begin to understand what's happening in your nervous system. Not because you want to become a neuroscientist, but because then you're able to discern where you are in your nervous system. So the state that you're in, so if you feel frozen, you will have a sense that you're frozen. You will know that you can't move forward. So that will be quite obvious and it will be quite loud. But doing a little bit of research to understand what that means and what you need will be really helpful. And again, for someone who's in a freeze state, that will be creating more stability in the nervous system. And there's a number of exercises that we can do around that, such as breathing slowly and being really attuned to our breath, such as soothing touch. If you're in a freeze response, what you would want to do is bring a little bit of that stability. And again, you can research that online. There are so many things around nervous system regulation. But also what you want when you're in a freeze state is to release a little bit of that pent-up energy. So movement can be really good. And, not necessarily starting with big movement, but it might be, depending on the energy that you have, it might be stomping your feet on the ground or shaking, or it might be moving your body and being really attuned to your body, because we want to literally I want to say defrost or thaw, the freeze response. And then what lies beneath the kind of freeziness, often it helps to work with someone somatically, because it's like every coaching. We don't know what we don't know, and we can't see what we can't see. And it helps to have someone also hold a safe space for us to come into contact with these with these states. But certainly there's so much you can do in terms of, this is how I'm feeling. Can I explore a little bit more about the window of tolerance, polyvagal theory? Where am I in my nervous system? Am I in that state of hyper-arousal where I'm go, 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 overachieving, doing all the things, and what I need is practices that will help me down-regulate? Or am I actually more in burnout, collapse, feeling really like I can't anymore, in which case I need to activate a bit more. So there's so much online that you can find around that. And that would be, I think, a great place to start, because it also normalizes our experience. There's intelligence at play within our body in these responses. The nervous system that freezes us, there's intelligence here to say, we don't have enough capacity, slow down. So not to make any of that wrong. It's just insight and information that we can then use to move forward differently. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And as women, we're kind of known to use our inner wisdom, but I think that in the society that we are in today, we miss those signals and we try to suppress them, or we just don't have the time really to listen. So thank you for sharing some of the ways that we can actually start to attune a little bit more. That's really important, and something that I have not done a lot myself. So I'm going to definitely look into it more.
And you'll see, we often seek the big things because we used to big change fast, but actually the little things make such a huge difference. For me, self-compassion was transformative. And I know it's transformative for many women. So no wonder can go a long way. Just taking a few breaths can go a long way if we do this regularly. Yeah. I think that's, again, little and often, and don't underestimate the power of small changes.
That's great. So a little bit before we round off, are there things that we have not talked about that you think are important to share, or that you would like to add to the conversation?
I mean, I think we've gone in a wide circle, perhaps just rounding off by some of the things we might have touched on in our previous conversation around wealth and the nervous system, because it's all linked. And it will be repeating some of what we've already said, but I'll be very quick. I think, again, because we have these imprints within us around worthiness, those imprints will, to a great extent, drive our behaviors, our choices, our ways of being, and that will include driving these behaviors, ways of being around wealth. So pursuing things or not pursuing them, going for this promotion or not going for this promotion. And I think it's important to know that addressing these imprints is important if we want to create whatever wealth looks like for us, but an expansive way of feeling wealthy. And then learning to practice more receptivity, because I think as women, and maybe something we haven't talked about much, is often I think we learn to do it all alone, just sort of plowing through, and we don't need to depend on anyone. And that's great, but also quite detrimental, because it means we're under-resourced chronically. So learning through simple ways to receive, not just to give all the time, so that we learn to receive what's good in our life. Again, that may be receiving money, but that may also be receiving the moment we're in. As I was explaining with, my children, as I came home from work, I wasn't receiving that nourishing moment. And then moving into a sense of sovereignty, of cultivating that relationship with the self within us, who's resilient, who's got agency, who can make decisions, who we trust because we've developed self-trust, so we can make choices that are more aligned with what we want. They're not so much coming from shoulds or what perfection would look like or what the neighbors will think, but they're coming from a place of sovereignty. And when we're feeling that we are stable in our nervous system, we have a sense of enough self-worth that we're not sort of on shaky grounds, then sovereignty becomes much easier, and we can make choices from a completely different place that are more attuned to what we desire, not just our needs, but what we desire. So maybe just leaving your listeners with that. To me, that's the journey.
Amazing. And maybe I want to pick up on one thing there. You talk about the imprints, and how do you shift those imprints for someone who maybe not really understands or knows so much about that?
Yeah, so the imprints, it's almost like it's undigested life experiences. So it's experiences that we had in life where maybe it was too much too soon, or too little, or in some ways it's led us to believing that, let's say, we're not enough or that we're not deserving. And what we want to be doing, and again, it links back to some of what we said, is really creating space to be with those. So examples of imprints: perfectionism, people pleasing, procrastination, self-doubt, imposter syndrome. All of these, I would say, are imprints that women experience quite often. And some schools of thoughts are just shut down your inner critical voice or ignore your imposter. But actually, the somatic way is to create more space and more time to listen. So it touches a little bit on what we said earlier. Can we make a little bit of space to listen to this part of us that's saying, actually, I don't really feel good about this, so I don't want to do this. You might want to do this, but I don't want to do this. So that as we listen, this part of us that didn't have a chance to express itself can express itself. And as it does, it's almost like it's dissolving some of the activation around it. It's almost like a tablet, a vitamin that you put in water and fizzes away. And it doesn't mean that we never experience imposter syndrome or any of those things, but the frequency will diminish and the intensity will diminish. And a huge part of that is just listening inwards, offering ourselves self-compassion, creating space, and just allowing that that part of us to express itself. That's as simple as that. And we can, again, starting with no wonder I'm feeling like I have so much self-doubt, I can't do this thing I want to do. Again, that's an imprint. Can I just take a moment and to be with that self-doubt? Maybe just say, no wonder you doubting, remember that experience, or perhaps we don't remember, but where this happened and that was really unpleasant. And I wonder how that felt, and just noticing what it feels like in the body and following its lead. And again, sometimes it's easier to do this guided, but we can at least start with I'm here, I'm listening. What are you trying to tell me? That's the beginning of working with this imprint. And then we can see what we call blueprint. And this comes from one of my teachers, Dr. Sarah Coxon. Although I don't think she created those words, but natural blueprints come online. So, we think about, can I shut down this imposter and bring on my confidence? And that might work for some people. In my experience, it works for a period of time, but that imposter or self-doubt is still there. It's just been masked temporarily. So instead, what we're doing here is we're just holding it and we're spending time with it. And it's a bit like if you think of a child who has a tantrum, over time, if we listen, the anger will dissolve. And then there's naturally a little bit more space that emerges, and the child becomes a little bit more settled. And maybe what comes on the other side of that is a little bit of playfulness. And it's exactly the same for us. In a way, we are reparenting ourselves. So it's about just being with instead of trying to fix or suppress or repress or hide, creating a bit of space and just having patience and listening. And again, sometimes it feels too much. I can certainly say when I was in my burnout experience, I didn't have the capacity to do this on my own. I couldn't have done it. It was so big. There was so much there that had been just stuffed down and unprocessed that I would have felt like I was drowning. So I wouldn't have wanted to be coming into contact with this by myself. And so it's important to do this in really small ways and to find the support you need to feel stable in that experience. So stabilizing first, I'm okay, I have a resource here, and then moving a little bit closer towards what feels tender. Because if we move towards what feels tender from a place of activation or feeling really unsettled, then it's too much again, and our nervous system pulls back. So I hope that makes sense and that helps in some ways. In many ways, treating ourselves with the kindness we would give to someone we care deeply about, and treating the parts of ourselves who feel whatever they're feeling in the same way. Being with, tending to their needs, listening to what they have to say, and developing a different relationship with ourselves.
Wow, beautiful. A lot of things to think about. Thank you so much, Isabelle, for taking the time to share all of your wisdom and also your learnings and the journey that you went through. It's been great speaking to you again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was such a beautiful conversation, and I hope that it offers values to your listeners. So thank you for having me. Thank you, Catrine.
Thank you.